Bienvenue encore une fois, merci d'être encore présent pour cet atelier, merci d'être parmi nous. Nous allons maintenant ouvrir la troisième session de cet atelier centré sur un levier stratégique encore sous-exploité, stimuler l'investissement de la diaspora dans les secteurs émergents et innovants. On en a beaucoup parlé aussi au cours des deux premières sessions et même au niveau des mots d'ouverture officiels. Cette session portera sur l'identification des secteurs à fort potentiel pour les investissements de la diaspora, notamment dans la finance, la technologie et la recherche, on parle beaucoup d'IA actuellement, ainsi que sur les politiques publiques, les incitations et les cadres réglementaires permettant de faciliter ces investissements. Nous allons aussi aborder les moyens de fluidifier les transferts de fonds, de mieux orienter ces flux vers des projets structurants et de renforcer le lien entre investissement de la diaspora et développement durable, avec un objectif qui est clair, créer des passerelles concrètes entre les aspirations des investisseurs issus de la diaspora et les priorités économiques nationales, bien évidemment. Pour modérer cette session, nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir M. Leon Isaacs, directeur général de DMA Global des Royaumes-Unis, expert reconnu des transferts de fonds et de la finance exclusive liée à la migration. Mr. Isaacs, je vous laisse présenter les différents panélistes, vos invités, et bonne session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this third session on catalyzing diaspora investment in emerging and innovative sectors. So this is going to be a first for this session so far, because not only do we have three fantastic panelists here, we also have one who's in Rome, who hopefully we'll be able to see later on, Mauro Martini. But let me just introduce everyone here now, and then we can start straight away. I know it's after lunch, and we all had an excellent lunch, and the weather's very nice, but this is going to keep you wide awake, so don't worry, this is going to be a very interactive session. If the panelists answer the questions quickly, there'll be question and answers, but based on the first two sessions, I cannot promise that that will happen, so I'm sure we'll have another means of getting everybody to have your questions answered. So, I'm going to start on my far left, Mr. Roberto Cancel, who's the Senior Regional Labour Mobility Specialist at the IOM Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean in Panama. So I think he wins the prize, certainly on this panel, for the most air miles that he has clocked up. So welcome, Roberto. Next to me, on my left, I have Ms. Ronit Avni, correct? Okay, thank you. Who's the founder and CEO of Localized, which we're going to hear some more about, but it's basically a leading tech-driven platform that connects diaspora experts to students and entrepreneurs. So very keen to hear about that. And on my right, I'm delighted to say that we have Mr. Mohamed Amin Rekik, who is the Deputy Director General of Foreign Exchange Operations at the Central Bank of Tunisia. So, enchanté, you're welcome. And I don't know who is managing this, but I don't know if we can page Mauro Martini in, or whether he's going to join us later. I did see his picture on the screen. But I don't know if he is connected at the moment, so I'm sure one of the organisers will tell us. So Mauro, if you're there, you're very welcome. If you're not there, please hurry up and join us. Mauro, excellent. Mauro, thank you. No need to apologise. We're just delighted you could be here today. And we'll patch you in from time to time. But Mauro is in Rome at the moment, where he works for International Fund for Agricultural Development. He's an expert on many things, but particularly remittances, finance, and migration development linkages. And we'll look forward to your contributions as we go through. So we had a couple of three really good sessions. I thought the opening session was excellent earlier and really set the scene very well. And then the next two sessions were particularly good in, I think, both answering questions but also raising a lot of other questions. So this session is going to be slightly different topic, but I'm sure we'll be pulling on many of the themes that came out of there. Anyway, none of you are here to listen to me, but I might abuse that privilege. You're here to listen to the panelists. So let's start with you, Roberto, if we may. Could you sort of outline some of the specific mechanisms that you've seen that actually encourage diaspora investment in emerging sectors, and particularly where these intersect with remittances and labour mobility? So start with that long question, and we'll do a follow-up probably.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to start with a brief anecdote. When I started working with IOM 15 years ago, I managed a project in Kosovo for the Kosovar diaspora. And we were organizing focus groups in the diaspora. And in particular, we had one in Germany where a local official from the municipality of Suhareka joined with us. And they had already started having a diaspora department there long before there was a ministry or anything involved in the topic of diaspora engagement. So that's why we brought them. But I asked the official not to say anything until the end. And so throughout the focus group, all the participants were talking about all the problems they had with the government and all the issues and how they only came to ask them for money and they've been sending remittances for decades and they were tired of this and that and the other thing. And then at the end, I passed the word on to the official from the municipality. And he explained how in the municipality, they had a specific counter for diaspora during the summer when they came to visit. They had an economic zone that had incentives in terms of infrastructure, in terms of tax exemptions based on the number of employments that they created, and the tone completely changed. All of a sudden, all the participants in the focus group wanted to know more, were interested in engaging and investing in Kosovo, because it was one of the first times that they heard what the government offered them. And I think, as many of the other colleagues said, if you only get one thing from what I'm about to say, it's that. The main key to engaging with diaspora investment is offering something in return, offering good conditions, offering incentives. So a lot of the specific mechanisms, I think, have been mentioned throughout the sessions. So we had the governor of the central bank mention several in the last panel. Several of the panelists, Frida, mentioned many as well. So what I'll try to do is give sort of a way of thinking about some of these that will hopefully make it easier to think through the kind of incentives that, or the kind of mechanisms that work. So, as was mentioned by the governor of the central bank, the business environment is very important, making sure that there is an adequate business environment. That part of that is infrastructure. So, like in the example I gave from Kosovo, the economic zone guaranteed the infrastructure, physical, electricity, water, roads. Those could be focused in on the specific area of the economic zone and guaranteed for the investor. But infrastructure can also be legislative in terms of regulation. For example, we worked with the government in Morocco on legislation to facilitate crowdfunding from members of diaspora. And it was mentioned several times about the ability to move money in and out of the country. And infrastructure can also be on the financial side. So having functional stock markets and secondary markets to be able to liquidate investments when necessary. So business environment is fundamental, but then beyond that, there's a question of how do we get people to choose this country over others that have an adequate business environment. And that's where we come in to talk about specific incentives. Frida mentioned many times the matching grants or the co-investment. We've seen this work many times from Moldova, where IOM was involved in setting up such a scheme, or the most famous, the 3x1 in Mexico, where at the national level, the state level, and the municipal level, the government provide matching funds for diaspora collective remittances and donations in that case. Then fiscal incentives, like I mentioned in the example, also there are examples of giving tax breaks for certain kinds of investments from diaspora and from others. The Ecuadorian government used this to facilitate and mobilize investments, reducing the tariffs on the equipment that Ecuadorians would import for businesses when they return to the country, for example. But I think most importantly, especially when we talk about diaspora, is the third point I want to raise. So we have the business environment, we have specific incentives, but we need trust. And I think this is fundamental. In many cases, members of diaspora left for a reason. So there might be a level of distrust between them and the country of origin because they felt they had to leave. So how do we overcome that trust? And again, many of these things have already been mentioned, but I just want to highlight some of them again. Recognition, so in terms of either recognizing the contributions of specific individuals or of organizations, recognizing legal status for diaspora organizations can be very powerful. The Uruguayan government has done this with what they call consultative councils, that have a legal status within the country, even though they're based in diaspora. This leads me to the second point, which came up also in the opening remarks in the last session, is participation. Giving a space for diasporas to actually be part of the decision-making process in terms of what are how money is being used in the country of origin, what are the policies that are going to affect them as members of diaspora. And lastly, information. Making sure the information that is reaching members of diaspora is accurate, it is reliable, and is consistent. Part of that is making sure that there is a whole of government approach, that there aren't different messages from different ministries, different agencies. So as was mentioned, having a strategy or a framework helps very much in that. But also making sure that the information is getting to the people that need it. So one-stop shops can be very helpful in terms of investment, centralizing the different services and information that the government wants to give to investors, and that ensures that the information is consistent and accurate. Many times the distrust comes from a lack of information or inaccurate information. So I'll stop with that, but hopefully that was a good overview of some of the mechanisms, and love to hear more from the other panelists. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Roberto. I was just thinking if that was an exam question, that would probably be a model answer, I would think. So thank you very much for that. I mean, I think a couple of things really struck out. Incentives, which has come up a lot today, but the trust piece, obviously, but the information piece, I think, is absolutely critical. And there's so much, I wouldn't say misinformation, although that can be bred out there, but actually just lack of the current information, and also lack of an ability to check whether the current information or the information you have is actually the accurate information. So I think thanks for bringing those up. Ronit, I'm going to come to you, and sort of a two-parter for you, or probably five-parter, but start with, can you just outline a little bit about what your platform actually does and how it works? Because it's slightly different. Well, this is human capital and this is education, so it's not financial directly. But so keen to understand, for my benefit, hopefully the audience's, what it actually does. But also, we heard about digitalization earlier from the governor of the central bank, among others, about the importance of this. So can you share from your experience some good examples of technology-driven solutions? What are the key success factors in that as well?
Absolutely. And I'm excited to be here, particularly because there are two Tunisian diasporans that had an outsized influence and inspiring role in the work that we do at my company, which is called Localize. So it's very fitting to be here to acknowledge and appreciate them as well. So Dr. Mariam Malouche, who many of you probably know, at the World Bank, had done a lot of research looking at what was the willingness of diasporans to volunteer their time. And what she found, particularly for those in the diaspora from the MENA region, is that it was exponentially greater, that their willingness to give of their time to volunteer than it was to give money. So if the remittance economy is a $650 billion annual economy, then the knowledge remittance economy is exponentially greater. And one of the things that we try to do at our company, at Localized, is actually to harness some of that knowledge remittance economy. Loksan had, in the previous panel, referred to it as virtual return. We refer to it as knowledge remittances, giving back your knowledge and your expertise, but it's the same concept. It's closing the loop between those who have left, who have incredible insights and expertise, and making sure that those insights go back to the country at scale. So I'll give you an example of what that means. What does that look like? I was just looking at my phone earlier to check. Exactly 5 years ago this month, Munther Ben Hamida, who some of you know, he's very active with the Tunisian American Young Professionals Association, was at the time working at Apple. And he was in charge of business process operations, so very much overseeing supply chains at Apple. And if you think back to 5 years ago, it was COVID, and supply chains were in utter disarray. And so what we did on our platform, on Localized, what we do is we partner with universities across the MENA region, across Africa. We bring in industry experts to offer career guidance who share roots with the students. So they could be local, but they're largely diaspora experts. And then we bring employers in to try to hire the talent, also drawing from diasporans who are working in companies to serve as a bridge. So Munther was invited to come and talk to us about careers in supply chain management. Now, why is that important? Because historically, in an old way of thinking about Munther, you would have thought of him as brain drain. In the old way of thinking, educated in Tunisia, goes to California, works in California, that's drain. But with today's technology and infrastructure, as long as Munther can give back his knowledge and expertise, arguably, he's actually more valuable to Tunisian university students in California because of the scale of operations of Apple than he would have been if he had just stayed in Tunisia his entire career, because the breadth of supply chain and logistics in a small country is just much smaller. And therefore, as long as you close the loop on knowledge remittances, as long as whatever expertise you acquire abroad can go back to the students, it's not brain drain, it's brain circulation, which is the era that we're in. Now, what we found, and I think what Roberto said, which is very important, is trust is a key component to somebody's willingness to give of their time and their expertise. But what we found is that even in lower areas of trust, they're still willing to give back to students. So if they've lost trust, then investing in adults feels like a lost cause. They might be upset at the circumstances in which they had left, or where the country is, or the political situation, but giving back to the next generation feels like an investment that actually energizes. And so one of the questions that we had at Localized as a tech platform is, how do you harness that at scale? What we saw historically was that there were a lot of efforts to do, pairing, mentorship, entrepreneurs with experts. It's not as scalable. And so what we would do is we would bring in 10, 15, 20, 30 universities in a given country or region, and then bring in industry experts, and so the students can benefit from their expertise. And that was the way to look at that from a scale vantage point. And the last thing that I'll say on that is that it's critically important to close that loop. So one of the things that we saw, we actually looked at the Kosovo example. We researched diasporas around the world before launching. And Kosovo actually had set up a diaspora registry. At the time, I think they had 1.8 million people in country and 1 million abroad, or perhaps vice versa, don't quote me. But an enormous proportion of diasporans living abroad. And they created a registry where people would have to register their name, their address, and their occupation. And what I would offer to you today is that actually in today's age, technologically, what you need to know is what is their expertise, what is their availability, and what is their passion. Because if you have munthers all around the world who have expertise in things, you're not just trying to get them to invest, you're not just trying to get them to return. Often return is actually a lost cause. But if you can get them to share the edge of what they know. So in Munther's case, he was telling the students, here's how robotics and AI and automation are going to impact careers in supply chain management. And so if you want to pursue a career in that field, here are the things you're going to need to know, not just to keep up, but to actually be ahead. And that's a way that you want to be able to leverage diaspora expertise at scale.
Thank you. I was just going to have a follow-up question, given it's technology is important in what you do, but which technology-driven mechanisms do you think have the most potential for channeling diaspora investment, or is it so localized that you'd say everywhere is different? Are there a few key areas that are particularly hot, I suppose?
I think people are doing it naturally already. You have WhatsApp, you have LinkedIn. So depending, people are congregating in ways. We're seeing, certainly MENA in Africa, we're seeing it on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn. For us, the reason why we even launched Localized as a platform was to aggregate universities and to create a space for them where they felt like it was geared at their level of career exploration. But it's certainly not the only way. I would go to where they are. I would try to figure out, so if Type or Atuj or any of the organizations, whatever the mechanisms are, or frankly, partner with the learning management systems of the universities here in Tunisia. I know we at the time were working with these career centers that were aggregated across, I think, 32 universities. There was an initiative with career centers across the country. So you want to go where the people are. The one thing that did make me frustrated back in the day, I hear a lot that every country sets up their own platform. I think that's a mistake unless the language is especially difficult to navigate in or to replicate, because every country is essentially doing the exact same thing. The only difference is who it's populated by and what the navigational language is. And so aggregating, and for those who are interested, I'd love to speak to you about that, because what we found is that actually economies of scale make a difference. And I'll give you an example about what I mean by that. Someone like Munther comes to a platform to give back to Tunisian students, but he's also perfectly happy if students show up from Egypt or from Mexico or from wherever else. And so the experts are especially motivated by impact, by the places they care about. Like we call diasporans people who have their heart in at least two places. And so they want to give back to where their heart is, but they want to make a difference. And so you want to go to where they're going to feel that there's maximal impact. And if you can do that, ideally, you don't want to do it country by country, because there's a graveyard of platforms that we've seen over the years. We've been at this for about 7 years, and we've watched all these platforms sort of come and go. And if you can master scale, then you have some resilience.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think scale is absolutely fundamental to most of these initiatives, and we've heard so much. I think trying to scale those is absolutely critical. Well, we were just talking about technology, so let's try and use it. Mauro, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you yet. Not yet, but I'm sure we will. They're just polishing the screen so we can get your beautiful face on it. Let me ask you the question while that's happening anyway. Obviously, Mauro, you've worked across so many different countries. Can you sort of, I think maybe do two or three things here. One is talk about the difference between a remittance and a diaspora investment, because I think they so often get combined or confused even, and I think we all need to be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about a remittance and what we're talking about when we're talking about diaspora investment. But then can you talk about what are some of the main factors that will actually help maybe convert remittances into diaspora investment, or perhaps even just create the right environment for diaspora investment? So over to you.
Thank you, Liam. Indeed, we approach at the two source to flows funding, let's say, in a different manner. It is important to fully clarify the difference between remittances and diaspora investment, because although these flows come from the same source, it is true, the migrant, so sometimes we have the tendency to merge them. Remittances and diaspora investments are very different in scope and needs. International remittances respond directly to a family need, right? They are private cross-border person-to-person payments of relatively low value. They are sent regularly every month or 10 times a year by a migrant worker to their relatives in home countries, with a specific purpose of supporting the livelihoods and the wellness of their families back home. So their use is often decided by the receiver. And here is where we mainly intervene to support better access to remittances, especially in rural areas, and also to provide a wider range of opportunities for their use. And I will show you or give you a couple of examples of how we intervene here. In turn, diaspora investments respond to a personal goal. To personal goals set by the migrants itself, who wish to finance business opportunities in their countries of origin, who wish to contribute to the development of their countries of origin. And their investment can be either individual or collective, and can vary in terms of size, scope, duration, frequency. But even if sometimes they appear interlinked, it is important to know that they require unique and adopted approaches to fully maximize their development potential. In particular, diaspora investments, especially the new generations, are very keen to get a return on their investment. So not only to contribute to the sustainable development of their countries and communities of origin, but of course they are investors and they would like also to receive a return on that. Now, if you look at remittances, what we usually say at DIPA is that remittances are helping people to achieve their own efforts, one family at a time. So they respond to basic needs, they reduce poverty, they put food on the table, they help people, sending people to their children to school, they help getting access to healthcare, but they also respond to more sophisticated needs, indeed. So the need of savings, access to credit, even insurance, investment. They even support climate resilience in some way. So the real impact of remittances on sustainable development resides in financial inclusion. And if we manage to maximize this aspect, we can create the condition for financial independence of the people that are receiving remittances. This is also part of the discussion that we are having, for instance, at the Financing for Development. You know that there will be an international conference on financing for development in end of June, beginning of July in Sevilla. And this is a unique opportunity to shape the future infrastructure of development finance. And in this context, we are pushing a lot, advocating a lot for a stronger language on the impact of remittances through financial inclusion in the receiving countries, because, and especially rural areas, because we examples are with APS International, an international NTO, for instance, in the corridor between the EU and the Gambia. We are working on reducing the cost and linking remittances, also in this case with microfinance services, such as access to mobile wallets, savings accounts, financial products in rural areas, and also in this case, everything is linked to financial literacy for the beneficiaries. In other countries, such as Kenya, for instance, we are working with SACCOs, the Savings and Credit Association, in order to understand, first of all, their position in the remittances value chain, identify whether SACCOs can really play a role, because they are one of the first and more accessible financial institutions for rural people in Kenya. And then, based on the findings, the recommendations of the assessment of the market, how to unleash the role of these kind of entities, these kind of actors, the SACCOs, that are now starting pilots for processing international remittances for their members. So you see, there are a lot of angles where you can tackle these. But again, on remittances, the key aspect is really linking remittances to additional financial services that will provide basically the people that are receiving remittances with tools towards their financial independence.
Mauro, thanks very much for now. We will come back to you. But that was great. I think what you really outlined is actually at the remittances market level, there's a lot of room for improvement, but some of the themes are still the same: regulation, data, etc., etc. Now, if we move to you, Monsieur Rekik. I'm going to ask the question in English, but I know you're going to answer in French, which is good for both of us, I think. So anyway, I think what would be useful is if you could outline, given your position at the central bank, how can we ensure that diaspora investment is not just reactive, but is actually strategically aligned with Tunisia's development priorities for 2026 to 2030. Okay?
Ok. Merci, bonjour tout le monde. Donc, merci Monsieur Léon. Il est vrai que Monsieur le gouverneur cette matinée a parlé donc du côté donc cadre réglementaire et de la confiance qui doit être donc donnée à la diaspora et ce qu'on appelle aussi sur le plan change nous les TRE, les Tunisiens résidant à l'étranger. Et d'ailleurs, comme mon ami Roberto a parlé de ce cadre réglementaire, donc je vais un peu essayer de vulgariser et de faire savoir, connaître donc à nos amis, à la diaspora, aux Tunisiens résidant à l'étranger, qu'ils ont plusieurs avantages sur le plan change. Parce que c'est la première spécialité de la Banque centrale à ce niveau-là. Donc depuis des années, la Banque centrale en tant que force de proposition, en tant que institut d'émission et en tant que responsable de la publication des circulaires, donc, qui sont adressés aux banques, aux opérateurs économiques, à la diaspora, à tous les investisseurs. Donc, elle a essayé de donner la place méritée à la diaspora. Et donc, les Tunisiens résidant à l'étranger, aujourd'hui, depuis des décennies, bénéficient de plusieurs avantages, notamment en matière d'ouverture de comptes étrangers en devises. Parce que la diaspora, les Tunisiens qui résident à l'étranger, n'ont pas de problème sur le plan change pour l'ouverture des comptes étrangers en devises en Tunisie, n'ont pas de problème pour transférer les fonds au crédit de ces comptes-là, et n'ont pas de problème non plus pour retransférer les fonds vers les pays où ils résident. Quoique, on préfère à ce que les fonds résident le plus longuement possible en Tunisie. Donc, ils n'ont pas de contraintes, ils ont cette souplesse et cette liberté-là. En plus, donc, notre réglementation de change, elle est assez avancée, mais on ne parle pas encore de dinar totalement convertible. Donc, on a cette distinction entre résidents et non-résidents. Eh bien, la diaspora, les Tunisiens résidant à l'étranger, donc n'ont pas de soucis, parce qu'ils peuvent cumuler les deux statuts pour plusieurs opérations, dont par exemple l'acquisition de biens immobiliers, ou donc l'ouverture de comptes en dinars en Tunisie, ou la gestion de leurs avoirs en Tunisie. Ils n'ont aucun souci à ce niveau-là. En plus, en ce qui concerne l'investissement, eh bien, donc, encore une fois, les Tunisiens n'ont pas de soucis. Donc, ils peuvent investir en Tunisie en tant que résidents ou non résidents. Donc, ça dépend de leur choix, de leur stratégie. S'ils investissent en tant que non-résidents, ils financent en devises, ils ont la garantie de transfert des dividendes et des bénéfices. Et la Banque centrale, à ce niveau-là, donc, elle a publié depuis donc, fin 2018 une circulaire qui a permis ce qu'on appelle la digitalisation de la fiche d'investissement. Et donc là, cette fiche d'investissement, c'est la garantie de transfert. Et donc nous avons une plateforme qui existe donc sur le site internet de la Banque centrale et qui permet à nos amis tunisiens résidant à l'étranger d'y accéder donc à partir de n'importe quel point donc au monde pour justement accomplir les formalités et obtenir cette garantie de transfert. Bien sûr, je ne peux pas donc clôturer cette intervention sans parler aussi du projet donc du nouveau code d'échange auquel la Banque centrale de Tunisie elle a participé très activement. Et donc ce projet il est axé sur la consolidation des libertés, sur l'adoption du principe de liberté en ce qui concerne la relation entre la Tunisie et les pays étrangers. Et donc nous avons proposé à ce que tout un chapitre soit consacré aux Tunisiens résidant à l'étranger pour leur faire savoir justement donc, les avantages dont ils peuvent bénéficier et donc les garanties dont ils peuvent bénéficier aussi. Et donc voilà.
Merci beaucoup. I think maybe as a follow-up question, you sort of outlined about the regulatory framework. Are there changes that you think could be made to the current regulatory framework that could be beneficial to diaspora investment, or is it fit for purpose already?
Bon, je pense que sur le côté réglementaire, donc là, c'est la publication du nouveau code de change, ce sera l'occasion à la Banque centrale de Tunisie donc de encore donner plus d'éclaircissement, donner plus d'assouplissement à nos amis résidents à l'étranger. Ça, c'est au niveau cadre réglementaire. Au niveau donc de la coordination entre les différentes instances et institutions nationales, donc là, la coordination, elle fonctionne. Nous avons ici plusieurs représentants de plusieurs ministères. On collabore d'une façon étroite. Et donc, on veillera à ce que donc, le code ne soit pas en sa finalité, le projet du nouveau code, une finalité en soi. Donc là, ce sera l'occasion encore pour booster l'investissement et comment trouver la solution pour que les flux qui sont transférés par la diaspora donc, soient canalisés vers des investissements qui sont rentables pour l'économie et pour les investisseurs aussi.
Merci beaucoup. I just had to wait for the translator to finish, just to make sure my understanding was correct, which it wasn't. So that's, but that was very helpful. And I think one of the key things that we often hear is, and you've sort of alluded to that, is well, two things really there. One is a consistent message from whichever department in government is giving the information, and then secondly, actually just making the information available. And often when we talk with diaspora groups around the world, the information may be how they perceived it when they left the country or when their family member last told them, and things change, but they're not always aware of that. So I think it's really important what you said there. Roberto, you've been very quiet there because we haven't allowed you to talk, so now's your chance. So we're just going to do another round of questions here. So how do labour mobility and diaspora engagement in sectors such as technology and infrastructure, which we've heard throughout the day as being very important, move together to drive sustainable investment in high growth economies? And what sort of strategies have proved most effective in driving this?
Okay, thank you for another opportunity to speak. I appreciate it, and actually I'm going to exploit it a little bit. To touch on one point which I overlooked in my last answer, and I think one of the things that's very important to consider and recognize when we talk about diaspora engagement is that we often talk about the diaspora, but it's actually not a monolith. There are many different groups and different profiles within the diaspora. And so when we're trying to think of mechanisms to facilitate investment, we need to think of those different profiles that exist. So do you want to get an investment of $1 million from one person, or do you want to get $1 from 1 million different people? And there are different approaches for both. And the best way to go about it is trying to create mechanisms that accommodate those different profiles and those different ways of engaging. But going back to the question, in terms of how does labor mobility and diaspora engagement impact on emerging sectors, I think one of the things we've talked about quite a bit is, of course, economic capital. We also touched on human capital, and I think that's very important, especially when we're talking about innovation and emerging sectors. But within IOM, we also talk about two other kinds of diaspora capital, and that's social capital and cultural capital. And so I won't delve much into the questions of economic and human capital, because I think we've covered those quite well. But social capital, I think, is a very important contribution that diasporas can make, especially in these innovative sectors. And it goes to what Ronit mentioned about the diaspora being more useful where they are. Because when we talk about social capital, we talk about the networks that the diasporas have created, both in their country of origin, but also in their country of destination. And one of the examples that we often use for this was here in the region, in Morocco. There was a vice president in Boeing that was of Moroccan descent. And from his position as vice president, he was able to channel the investment of Boeing into Morocco, which created a whole new sector that had not existed in the country before, the aviation sector. And on average, the salaries in that sector are well above the average salaries in the country as a whole. So even though that member of diaspora didn't invest his own money, so it wasn't economic capital, and he wasn't necessarily, training or educating students back in Morocco, his network was able to be mobilized to create these new opportunities in the country of origin, in this case in Morocco, to open up a whole new sector that didn't exist before. Now, what are some of the strategies that can tap into this different kinds of contribution? When we talk about labor mobility, I think one of the most interesting strategies that from IOM we've been working on is what we call the skills mobility partnerships. And these are mechanisms where the countries of origin and countries of destination find sectors that are of common interest, and they enter into agreements where there will be capacity building in the country of origin, migrants can travel to the country of destination, and they could also come back and bring back that knowledge and experience to the country of origin. And I think one of the examples I always share in this regard was work that we did in Egypt, again, within the region, between Egypt and Italy. So in Italy, they'd identified a need for Arabic speakers in the tourism sector because they had lots of tourists coming from the Gulf. And Egypt, of course, had the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and they wanted to develop those tourist destinations to be more competitive in the global environment. So there was an agreement between the two countries to capacitate and to train Egyptian workers at the Italian level so they can migrate to Italy. But interestingly, most of those that went to Italy actually worked for Egyptian businesses in Italy. So again, the diaspora engagement comes in there again. Other strategies, I think that when we talk about innovation that are very interesting is using big data to actually identify diaspora professionals, be they vice presidents or be they professors that can provide education and training opportunities. One of the very interesting models that we've worked with in Central Asia is what's called onomastics. So you could scrape, data scraping, I didn't make that up, it sounds ugly, but it's the actual technical term, to identify people from the specific nationality or country of origin based on their name. So these are just some examples. There's a lot more that we could talk about, but I think the key here is to recognize that many times the diaspora have networks that can benefit the country of origin. They can channel innovation, technology, and know-how through those networks if the conditions and the opportunities are given to them. Thank you.
Thank you for all the clapping. I'm sure the speakers appreciate it anyway, and It's great. Well deserved anyway. But actually, I think what's really good is you use live examples, and I think that really sort of brings it home to all of us. And actually, that sort of brings me on by a very circuitous route, Ronit. Earlier, you talked about three things. I made a note, so I hope I got this right. One was about knowing the expertise of an individual, their availability, and their passion. And I sort of get what you're talking about, and you can see how that would work in certain circumstances. But how do you really sustain that over the long term? How do you scale it? Because these are so many sort of lots of individual things that come together, make a compelling story. But easy enough to say that, but it's difficult to make it happen. So what sort of approaches do you use to make that a reality?
Thank you for that. I'll give you a couple of examples, two different approaches, one from our company and one more general opportunity. So at Localized, one of the things that we've been seeing is the agentification, the AI agents taking over entry-level tasks, which compound and then take over entry-level roles. So there are fewer jobs today in sectors like technology than there were 2 years ago. And we see a lot of governments, as an example, that have all these upskilling programs, training young people to be engineers and product managers and marketers. All of those jobs are about to take a massive hit, and the first people to get hit are going to be the entry-level jobs, the junior jobs. We knew this ahead of time because a lot of our customers are big tech, the Googles and the Amazons and the PayPals and others, that about 2 years ago we saw that the people that used to work with us were getting fired. They were getting fired, meaning that and then they were getting, their bosses and their replacements were getting relocated to focus on more traditional markets that they had been accustomed to, certain talent pools. And so we started to think about where are the jobs going, because AI is automating the jobs that are right now. And so we landed on green skills. And so because there's all this new regulation, there are so many countries now that have new requirements to report on carbon emissions, ESG compliance. In Morocco, there's the Croissant Vert initiative. In the EU, there's all kinds of regulations coming. And so we actually began to host what's called the Green Talent Forum, where thousands, it's the largest talent forum across Africa and the Middle East, where we had industry experts at the very cutting edge of green sectors sharing their expertise about what's coming, how do you get prepared. And then we actually partnered with the first female African tenured professor at Cambridge University, Dr. Tulula Oni, and we actually, based on input from chief sustainability officers around the world, developed a carbon and ESG analyst course. And we're now planning a 10,000-person green hackathon to have young people calculate the carbon footprints of their universities and recommend decarbonization strategies. And Dr. Oni is pulling together a diaspora panel of judges from all over the world with roots in Africa who are going to be judging the candidates. I'm saying this to say that that's a 10,000-person initiative. We've served over, in the hundreds of thousands of students. Certainly the LinkedIns and the WhatsApps can handle millions. So scale, it's a matter of degrees. It also depends on the size of the country, but it is very much doable. Certainly tapping into diaspora organizations. I know many of you are going to the African Diaspora Network conference in Washington, D.C. in a few weeks. There are these networks that are bringing people together. It's an excellent way to start to organize and then figure out what is the technological mechanism. But when I think about scale, I think both about scale, but also about lasting opportunities. So I'll offer two quick challenges to you. One is that, especially here on the continent, the main industries across Africa, construction, agriculture, hospitality, tourism, most of those industries require human beings. So even if AI comes and automates, or even robotics comes and automates, these are sectors where you're going to need a human in the loop. Right now, there's a huge wide open space for AI plus construction, AI plus agriculture, AI plus hospitality in ways that actually can serve, that don't align with the needs, let's say, in Silicon Valley, but very much align with the needs here, where there's an opportunity to leapfrog and innovate. And that would be pulling on diasporans, it would be pulling on local expertise. So there are opportunities to figure out where are those places where people aren't trying to play catch up, they're actually trying to leapfrog ahead to become leaders in a space. Because if you do that, drawing on diaspora expertise as well, you can, like the example of Boeing, you can start to anchor centers of talent and excellence that global employers want to pull from, which is optimal. The challenge that I would also offer is that many years ago we did research to look at professors abroad. So professors who are, let's say, at the top 10 universities in the world or 50 universities in the world, if you ask them if they would be willing to leave their institution and come back home, the answer is no. If you ask them if they're going to come home and teach a class, it depends on their families and logistics. But if you ask them if they would be willing to teach a course online in the summer, the answer is overwhelmingly yes. And so the question that I have is, can the PhD students in the country of origin serve as the assistants, as the teaching assistants, as the number twos to those top tier academics, researchers, experts, so that you're cultivating the next level of talent in country that stays, that's hyper-local, but that interacts with thousands of people. Like if every teaching assistant at a PhD level is trained by the top person from that country abroad, and then they're impacting thousands of students on an annual basis, you start to get some scale. So I would encourage you to play with that interplay between diaspora academics at top institutions and their willingness to give back, because you would be amazed. Like we actually had even financially modeled it out. It's not expensive, and there are all kinds of ways to do it, but it could have an impact. It's not something we're doing, but we can see that it's an opportunity that can be, especially, that's not necessarily true of Tunisia, but in some of the countries we researched, there's a lot of nepotism at the university level and a lot of corruption where people only rose to the top based on who they knew in country. But the diaspora professors, that was not the case. So if you actually have them teaching courses, you're leveling up certain expectations about what excellence can look like. And then bringing in, you know, the next generation and sort of going around the corruption or the nepotism that you might find.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think the 10,000 participants in a hackathon sounds like you probably have to be really good at hackathoning to get to the top of that group anyway, let alone anything else. So you probably move on to something great. Thank you for that. Mauro, I hope you're still there. We haven't forgotten about you. So I'm going to give you a question, if that's okay. And this really builds from what we were talking about earlier. We've heard a lot during the day already about partnerships and the different roles, the multiple stakeholders. This is not a straightforward area where one entity can solve all the challenges. So I know that your area and expertise, you're dealing with partners all the time. So perhaps you could maybe highlight the roles of perhaps take a couple, public-private partnerships as one, and another one maybe multilateral instruments, and just say how these can actually be used and leveraged, and maybe have some examples for us.
which is a platform for dialogue, an official platform for dialogue, where you have the regulator, you have the government, and you have the private sector entities. And they meet on a regular basis, 3-4 times in a year, to discuss what are the challenges, the biggest challenges in the remittances market, international remittances market, and what also are the opportunities for them to improve the remittances market. The role of the multilateral organization like IFA, like the UN, like also IOM, are, I think, really to contribute to ensure that this platform can work. The UN, for instance, is a neutral body and can play as a broker. We saw that role was very successful in the framework of the National Remittance Recovery Network. The UN has this opportunity to put people together to discuss and to incentivize the action. And also in terms of programs, when we say that we partner with private sector entities, with other entities, is how do we do that? What we try to do is we put some initial capital, we design together a program, a project that we believe can really respond to the need of a given market, and we put initial capital and we test with the private sector. So let's say, if I may, we force them to go into a market area where maybe they will not go alone, because maybe it's too risky for their business. But then, with additional capital that can come from outside and with some, rules around it, they decide, okay, let's go, let's test, let's try. I have an example, for instance, of one of our projects in Sri Lanka. We partnered with the biggest commercial bank in the country. It's called National Bank. And we said, look, remittances can really be used as a collateral to have access to microloans. Why don't you test remittance-linked services and access to microloans in some of your branches, especially in rural areas. We started with 5-6 branches, and after a few months they say, okay, thank you very much, now we go along, what is working, and they decided to replicate and adapt this model to all the more than 200 branches that they have in rural areas. This is an example how this partnership can really be a win-win solution, and that the private sector just need the incentive to enter a given market, and then we will take it from there. And as an additional point, if I may, this would also spur and promote competition, because it's important to understand that with limited, in this case, limited amount of money, you can really push innovation in a given market, and then the competitors will see that this new business model is working, and they will be influenced to adopt similar models, and therefore spur competition, more transparency in the market, probably also reducing costs.
Great, thanks, Mauro. There was a lot in there, and I'm not going to repeat it all, but I think one of the things that's come out probably from most of the sessions is there's clearly no shortage of ideas or even inspiration out there, and it's good to hear you outline there, Mauro, actually the role of the public sector in this case, or multilateral body, in actually trying to prompt pilots and get people to actually undertake activities that may not make it to the top of a priority list of their organisation. So I think that's really important. I think the other role that you probably didn't have enough time to talk about is sharing the results. I mean, we've heard here lots of examples. I think there's nothing better, and Martin mentioned it earlier, that we actually get some really decent monitoring and evaluation and sharing of actual numbers and results around specific projects, so that we understand either why it was a fantastic success or why something didn't work, and we actually then see, can we apply that in our own context, and can we actually then learn from that so we don't either make the same mistakes or so we can get to the successful phase much more quickly. And I think I'd love to hear more. Maybe the challenge for the next group, because we won't be the ones having to answer it, will be, have you got any monitoring and evaluation results from anything you're going to say that we can all learn from? But perhaps that's wishful thinking. Anyway, Monsieur Rekik, sorry for keeping you there, but I think maybe we've heard about digitization quite a lot. The governor of the central bank even mentioned it this morning, and you mentioned it a little bit as well. But could you maybe just say a little bit more about some of the digitization and digitalization projects that the central bank has implemented to encourage Diaspora to invest more in the country? Sorry.
Sans problème. Merci. Donc, je vais essayer d'être bref pour que vous puissiez garder de l'énergie pour le prochain panel. Donc, bon, nous avons actuellement sur le plan change, système d'information de la Banque centrale, nous avons 4 projets de digitalisation qui sont pratiquement en cours, dont un, il a commencé, donc on a commencé l'exploitation. Donc, le premier projet, il s'appelle le projet Tradis. C'est la plateforme de gestion des titres de commerce extérieur. Donc, ça a relation avec tout ce qui est donc, relation avec l'extérieur, tout ce qui est importation et exportation de marchandises. Donc, ça va permettre à toutes les parties prenantes de pouvoir accéder à l'information, les opérateurs, la Banque centrale de Tunisie, la douane tunisienne, le ministère du Commerce et le TTN aussi. Donc, ce projet-là, il est dans les étapes donc, ultimes de finalisation pour qu'il soit en exploitation. Nous avons aussi le deuxième projet, c'est ce qu'on appelle le projet EXOP. C'est la plateforme de dépôt et de traitement électronique des requêtes de change. Parce que, comme je l'ai dit, donc, nous sommes dans une étape très avancée de la convertibilité courante du dinar, mais on n'est pas encore là. Donc, il reste encore quelques opérations qui sont soumises à accord de la Banque centrale. Avec la création de cette plateforme-là, donc, on va faciliter donc, le dépôt de la demande et la gestion des demandes de transfert. Nous avons le troisième projet, c'est la plateforme du suivi des opérations de change des comptes à réglementation spéciale aussi. Donc ça a relation avec les banques de la place, avec la Poste aussi, la Poste tunisienne. Tout ce qui est donc mouvement, tout ce qui est reporting, donc ça va être digitalisé à 100%. Et là, ça va permettre à la Banque centrale d'avoir un tableau de bord donc, à jour et qui permettra de faciliter la prise de décision pour la poursuite de la libéralisation. Et le dernier projet, c'est celui de la plateforme des investissements étrangers dont je vous ai parlé tout à l'heure. Donc, depuis 2018, nous avons jugé qu'il est temps donc, de la rénover et donc de mettre un peu de l'ordre et d'introduire de nouvelles innovations. Donc, c'est la refonte et l'extension de la plateforme des investissements des non-résidents en Tunisie. Donc, tous ces projets-là sont en plein régime et on espère qu'ils seront tous fonctionnels d'ici peut-être l'adoption du nouveau code d'échange. Comme ça, on va faciliter la vie à tout le monde. Merci.
That's really informative, thank you. I think it's quite interesting because some of that digitization is to help the flow and the back office move much more smoothly and quickly, which is quite often difficult to sell to people who only experience the benefit, but they don't get out of bed and say, I really hope that you can get that payment through without going through 6 different steps. So I think, it's great you're doing it. We have to tie it into the benefits for people. And actually, I just wanted to have a follow-up, which maybe is probably too big a question for now, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, do you see opportunities to channel diaspora financial resources into Tunisia's integrated national financing network?
Bon, bien sûr, c'est la question la plus importante, je pense. Et comme l'a dit Monsieur le gouverneur, donc, ce matin, nous devons identifier les projets, devons entraîner les flux de transfert de la diaspora, ici en Tunisie, vers des investissements stratégiques à haute valeur ajoutée, comme par exemple l'économie verte ou l'énergie renouvelable. Et je pense qu'aujourd'hui, cette table ronde, c'est une occasion inouïe pour commencer. Donc, on doit pousser davantage la réflexion. Je suis convaincu que la coopération entre les différentes instances nationales et internationales et la diaspora donc, va nous permettre de dénicher ces opportunités-là et de trouver, donc, de mettre en place les mécanismes adéquats pour donc, réaliser ce défi-là. Et je pense que je crois fortement en cette coopération et je suis convaincu qu'on va réussir cet exercice-là, cette challenge-là.
Thank you very much for that. So the answer is yes. Exactly. Okay. Well, that's a really good way to sort of finish this. I am conscious about timings and so on. I'm just going to try and summarize a little bit about what we've heard, if you'll forgive me, which hopefully might focus us for the next session. But I think, you know, there's been some really interesting things that have been said by all speakers today, but obviously particularly this panel, which was by far the best. I think, first of all, really, you know, that diaspora investment must involve from or move on from remittances, and I think Mauro was very clear in explaining the differences. And obviously, you don't have to have sent remittances to be an investor. And I think that's the other point. We should really look at these in not necessarily exactly the same homogeneous groups. So I think that's particularly important. Technology, 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 it allows us to do things we could only have dreamt of before, and we're only scratching the surface with what it can actually do. So I think let's look at how we can really use that to accelerate where we want to go. We've talked about regulations. We can't get away from them, but I think we can make them as efficient as possible. And this is one area where, whatever the national circumstances, there's almost certainly another country somewhere that also has had the same experience and maybe has tackled it in a different way. And sharing at country levels with other peer countries can really help accelerate progress there. And I think we've heard it again, is coordination across different government departments in particular, but actually not just across government departments, but that's a good place to start. But then let's move on from there to with all the other stakeholders, and I think Mauro outlined that very well. I think in terms of some of the key things that keep coming up, the investment incentives. I think this word incentives means lots of things to different people, and this is where actually diaspora mappings, not just about where are the diaspora and what is their backgrounds, but actually understand what motivates them, what gets them to tick. You talked about passion, but I think I'd also talk about what motivates people. And certainly when we've looked and researched with diasporans on exciting things like diaspora bonds or whatever, or investments, it always comes back. Pretty much the second question they ask is, what's the money going to be spent on? And sometimes it doesn't have to be for them individually, but an incentive is, if I'm going to put money into this, it's going to be spent on the areas that I really gets me going. So I think incentives of whatever shape is really important. I think scaling, you talk very well about that. Scaling is absolutely critical. We're not going to get enough progress in the right areas if we're not able to scale that quickly. And then I think what we haven't really had time to talk to, but we need to, is sort of product design. Designing products, I think particularly blended financial products, things that actually can manage the risk or the perceived risk. I think it was Frida talked about risk earlier. Some of the risks are, some products are inherently more risky than others, but helping people to have products that manage the risk that they're comfortable with is great, which sort of leads me on to the final point, which is about financial literacy and sharing. We sort of assume financial literacy is only for people who don't have a bank account and are trying to understand products, but actually it's not. It's something that grows with us as we grow and as our lives change. And so continually educating and keeping people informed there also is a really important thing. So anyway, you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to say any more, except could we please give a round of applause to the panelists for your fantastic contribution. Thank you. And to you, Mauro, in Rome, that was also for you. So hopefully you heard it all those miles away. And back to you, Mr. Chair.
There it is. Thank you very much. Technology. I think it's the key word. Dans une précédente vie, certains peut-être me connaissent en tant qu'animateur radio, télé, mais j'ai été aussi informaticien pendant 12 ans dans une banque et ayant implémenté la dématérialisation dans cette banque avec les dossiers électroniques pour les demandes de crédit, par la suite tous les dossiers de crédit différents de la banque, le gain a été significatif pour augmenter en productivité et changer. Mais ce qui est le plus difficile par rapport à ce que vous avez dit tout à l'heure, c'est pour pouvoir accéder à la technologie, il faut aussi arriver à casser la résistance au changement et break the rules, casser les habitudes pour pouvoir avancer, aller plus vite et casser tous les carcans. Et donc, bon courage. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Les cadeaux?